Hey guys, welcome to our notes on life in Spanish Texas. We're going to be talking about where the Spanish lived, what kind of settlements they lived in, um, and concentrate on the four main types of settlements: missions, presidios, ranches, and civil settlements. About the notes, if something's in green, write it down. And if the entire slide's in green, copy down the entire slide. All right, so we'll start out with missions. So missions were at first run by priests. Um, The purpose was to convert Native Americans to the Catholic faith, and that continues with what we've learned from last unit. So the idea was that if they taught Native people to become good citizens and loyal subjects to the Spanish crown, then they would be good tax-paying citizens and help support the Spanish monarchy, the king and queen, to help fill that treasury as part of colonial and um, the colonial system. So Spaniards would hope that they would become skilled laborers and be productive in the Spanish economy. If all these goals were met, Spain promised to give control of the missions to local governments in their colonies. So, as missions began to appear in Texas, let's talk about what life was like in these missions. So, um, priests would begin their mornings with prayer, instructing the Native Americans how to pray and about the God, and then followed by instruction in the Catholic faith and everything that involves with that. So, after getting some food, then the Native Americans would work all day in fields or in workshops at the missions. After the evening meal, everyone would gather again in the mission for more religious instruction and more prayers before going to sleep. So that was what a day was like for a Native American in the missions, and they responded in different ways. The priests supervised and physically punished them when they were uncooperative. For the most part, it was not successful due mainly to the fact that Native Americans didn't care for Native life. There were many reasons for this. Some Native Americans were more apt to be farmers because they were farmers already, and many that were, hunters and gatherers didn't care for the mission life and being in one place. They were nomadic. Many did not like converting to the Catholic faith, and they did not understand this part of the Catholic missions. And then finally, as they some disagreed either with the way that the missions were run or with the Catholic faith, they would start to run away. And so the Presidio soldiers, who we'll talk about next, um, were capturing and punishing the the runaway Native Americans. So all in all, the mission system was unsuccessful. Um, so for many reasons. So number one, Native American populations within the missions, they shrank. So we look at the statistics of the missions, and um, they failed to convert more Native Americans. In fact, they would slowly lose numbers as the years went on. Many of the Native Americans died giving birth. They were exposed to different diseases, and the Spanish crown began to view the missions as a drain on Spanish finances. They were not happy paying for the missions to be run and paying for supplies because they were unsuccessful. So, one reason that the missions were such a financial drain was that they had to protect them. So, they built presidios as a way to provide military support for missions and also the settlements around and any Spanish citizens that were living in colonies like Texas. Until the communities could support themselves, these presidio soldiers would provide protection, bring back Native Americans who ran away from the missions, protect from attacks. There was always Native American attacks, but they also protected from uh, attacks from the French, and then they would also be responsible for protecting groups that were bringing supplies from Mexico City and in other parts of the Spanish colonies. And then finally, they wanted to guard herds of cattle and horses, things that were very valuable to Native Americans, and so they would often be stolen by Native American raiders. In the Presidio, um, they Presidios were built from either stone or adobe or logs. Presidio compounds were built in a rectangular fashion with four tall lookout points on each corner. And then inside the Presidios, there were barracks, um, separate sleeping quarters for officers, a chapel for prayer, and storage rooms for all their supplies inside this locked um, compound. And the only entrance was a huge main gate at the front. So, in addition, interspersed in among these different missions and presidios were also Spanish towns that would develop along trade routes in different places. Pobladores were colonists who lived in the towns or pueblos. Again, like presidios and missions, they were built using logs or adobe or stone, and they also were responsible for building dam and acequias into different parts off of Texas rivers to help water the fields and bring in water. Many pobladores were former Presidio families. Some were native Texans who had adapted to Spanish culture. Some were brought in from places like the Canary Islands or other parts of the Spanish colonies. Um, and some were just people looking for adventure and a place to make money. So some of the jobs they had in these towns were blacksmiths and gunsmiths, bakers and carpenters. Some transported goods from one town to another, driving carts, and some were merchants who operated general stores selling food, clothing, tools, and other goods. And then many of the cultural aspects like festivals and activities that started during the Spanish colonial time, we still see today. There were, however, problems in some of these towns. There wasn't always running water. They would be built near rivers, but not necessarily have running water in their town or sewage services. So there would be ditches for water being transported and ditches for sewage as well. Unclean living conditions in these towns often led to deadly epidemics. Um, so you would have um, different types of disease running rampant in some of these places where there was not um, uh, sewage and running water. There weren't always doctors, and then they were always at risk of being raided by natives, outlaws, smugglers, um, as we're very far away from the center of Mexican life in Mexico City. And then finally, we're going to talk about ranching in Texas. So, ranches, um, some colonists lived on, were a place where cattle, horse, sheep, goats, and hogs were raised. So we traditionally think about just a steer or a cattle, but there were all kinds of different ranches and farms in Texas. So they provided food and support to these colonies. They provided materials like leather, animal hides, and wool from sheep to make blankets and clothing. And they provided horses for the soldiers in the presidios because that was their mode of transportation in Texas. And so those are our four different settlements. Thanks for watching, guys.